here, and then I'm just taking some green and yellow, a very light amount. I don't need a lot. Okay, and I'm just going to tap. I'm just tapping with my brush. Tap, tap, tap. Okay, to make some bushes along the top edge. And don't worry if you accidentally hit the rock or if you accidentally overlap the black line, because we're going to paint over all that stuff, okay? So I'm just taking that and then doing a nice little, so you can go up and down, tap, tap, tap. And the reason why I like to have yellow and green both on my brush is it makes it so that you have to do a little less work when you're creating some highlights on there. Okay, so we just want to make it look like there's some bushes happening right there. And you can make them tall or you can make them short. It's up to you. So if you want them to be bigger. Okay. Madness. All right, so we're just going to play, and don't worry if they're not completely detailed and highlighted. I'm going to show you how we can do that later on too. So we want just to provide a base coat. So all this first step is for when we're painting our background and adding this stuff in. This is just to provide a base for everything else, okay? So our waterfall is going to go in front of this and between these two big rocks and into this black abyss here, which is going to be a water pool later, okay? So obviously, if these are wild bushes out in nature, you don't want them to be all exactly perfectly symmetrical. You want some areas to be higher, some areas to be lower, some areas to be lighter, some to be darker. If they're all merging into one color and just look like a blob, put down your brush, take a deep breath, take a big swig of some whatever you have next to you and let them dry for a minute and then come back in and add paint. So that's where we're at right now. And I'm glad you guys were all able to find me. Thank you. And we're able to move on from here, hopefully. All right. So I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. If you guys need help with anything, let me know. All right. Okay, everybody on the same page? So once you've created your little green shrubbery up there, you're going to clean your brush one more time. Lisa, yes, this will be posted and up. You'll have to watch 2 videos, obviously, because the first one got cut off, but you'll have to put... No, I didn't create any sort of like this. I just didn't super blend my colors together. So if some areas were a little bit lighter, don't worry about that. We are going to completely cover up those rocks, see? We're going to completely cover them up. So they don't need to be highlighted. They don't need to have any sort of true definition. They just need to be there so that we have an idea of where our waterfall is going to be at, okay? So we want to put that up there, and then we want to make sure that this little area where the black is dry. So you can take your finger and you can kind of run it along there, and if it's not quite dry, we're going to work on the next part, okay? So first step was light blue sky. Second part was fill the rest of the canvas with black paint. Thumbs up, okay? Next was take light gray and create 2 curved lumpy bumpy rocks in the middle of our black section here on the sides. So our waterfall is going to run down through the middle and then into like a creek or a pond or whatever you want to imagine this to be. So these do not need to go all the way down to the bottom, okay? So after you add those 2 in there, you're going to add a little bit of green and yellow up above by using a stippling technique or tapping. Tap, 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 tap. Like this to create some lumpy bumpy looking shrubbery, wild shrubbery. And I'm going to show you guys how to highlight that later. So don't worry about how to do that right now. You will learn how to do that later. Okay, but I'm going to show you guys, and I'm really excited about this, how to make some water now. And so we're going to define where our pond is going to be at here first. And I'm going to talk about the technique you're going to use to create your waterfall next. So once your shrubbery is in there and your rocks and everything, you're going to clean off your brush. And yep, we're still using the same old brush. So I'm going to clean this off, and then I am going to take a little bit of blue and white and partially mix them together. So see what I mean? I just touch into blue, touch into white, and just kind of partially mix them so that they're not completely blended. Okay? And then I'm going to take this brush, and instead of using the wide part, I'm going to turn it skinny wise, and I can just run it in horizontal brush strokes through the black down here. So I want some of the black to poke through, okay? And I want some of it to be lighter in some areas and darker in others. But I'm not going to have you fill up this whole area yet, because we're going to talk about how to create the look of little stones in the water. So if you notice in the original painting here, I have what looks like some kind of wet stones coming forward in the painting. So this is going to be the same technique that you use to create your waterfall. So I'm going to take a little bit of that paint on my brush, but then I'm going to wipe my brush off. So see how I very firmly wipe off on the edge of my plate or my palette so that I have a little bit of paint on there, but not too much, okay? And then I'm very lightly going to create a stone. So this is how I'm going to do this. I want to touch my brush. See how it's straight at the canvas like this? And I'm going to very lightly pull it to the right and then very lightly pull down to create a curve going to the right. Okay, and then I can very lightly touch on the same spot, very lightly drag my brush, push and drag, and then lightly pull it down like this. So if you very lightly do this, it's going to not leave a solid line. It's going to leave a little bit of space so that there's shadow of light and dark. And so I can I keep going back to that same starting point, and then I can start to lightly drag and pull on the right side, and then lightly drag and pull on the left side, so that I create this look of a rock that is getting run over with water. So you can take a little bit of white if you want to. So I can take just a tiny bit of white, wipe off my brush, and then I can kind of lightly, very lightly, so lightly that you're feathering your brush on the canvas. And see, it's all ending in the same spot here, okay? And then you can take your blue, and then look, I can run it underneath here. And it looks like that rock is just sitting in the water. So you can repeat the steps. So I take a little blue and white, okay, on my brush, not fully mixed. Very firmly wipe my brush off so that I have just a little bit of paint on my surface, okay? And then I can create another stone. So remember, I put my brush flat, straight at the canvas, very lightly push, pull off to the side, curve down, pull, push, go back to that center spot, pull off to the left, pull down. And then I can fill in the space very lightly, okay? And then I can add a little bit of white if I want. So if you're getting solid lines, it's either because you're pushing too hard or you have too much paint on your brush. So wipe your brush off every time you put paint on it and try that out, okay? Then you can add a little bit of white, and then you can add that blue or white, blue and white mixture along the bottom edge to define where the bottom of the stone is, and then you can wipe that through the rest of the canvas. So the black paint is serving as a shadow, and then the blue and white mixture is serving as where the light is hitting the water. And so it's actually beneficial. So I'm very lightly, I'm not pushing hard. My brush is turned sideways, so I'm getting the skinny edge of the brush, and I'm just very lightly brushing back and forth, like wiping my brush, okay? And so that those are all nice and horizontal brush strokes, okay? And you can create as many stones as you want. And if you're not in love with the stone, you can just run the blue through it, and then, so see, I can create a stone off to the side here. See, and if I don't love it, see if I can do this, and then I don't love it, I can just brush it out. See? As long as the paint is wet. Okay? So this is called a light on dark technique. So we put the black in to provide a shadow, a cast shadow already in our paint, and then we're using lighter colors just to provide a contrast to create the illusion of depth, okay? So I'm just using the sideways part of my brush. All right. And you can play. If you don't want just blue and white, you could definitely put like different shades of blue or little bits of purple or teal or even pink, depending on what kind of light is coming in, or you can just take little bits of white. But you don't want to completely fill in all of the black everywhere, okay? And so we're going to use that same technique that we use for the stones to create our basis for our waterfall. We're going to add lots of other details on top of that. But like I said, so I went back to my acrylic paint and I took a little bit of blue and white, and I didn't fully mix it because I want to have the light and dark present on my brush. I'm going to wipe my brush off on both sides like a peanut butter knife so that it's not fully loaded. And then I'm going to go back up here. I want to touch and make sure this green is dry, okay? And then I'm going to turn my brush sideways, and I'm going to touch on the edge of this inner corner of where the stone meets the bushes here, and I'm going to pull over and do like a curved L. So very light. You don't want to push. You can push kind of firmly at the top, but when you curve down and you drag here, you want this to be very, very light so that your bristles separate and you have that contrast of light and dark. So if you are pushing so hard that you're just getting a solid color, then you want to push a little bit lighter, okay? But then you're following that curve down, okay? So that means if you come from this side, you would curve in the opposite direction. So I would start at the top of the line and then curve down. And if you have some lumps and bumps in your rock, I'll show you a very easy way to create the illusion. So look, all the water doesn't have to come straight down. If you want to imagine that there's a rock that this waterfall is hitting, you can stop right here, and then you can create another waterfall right here. So I can create the same. So you'll notice this isn't a sharp corner. We just want to make it look like it's falling off the edge. So I create that curved upside down L, and then I come in and I repeat the same brush strokes. So then it looks like it's shorter and shorter every time you fill in the middle, but then it looks like there's another little waterfall coming down here. And then we can create some splashes and things at the top here later to create more definition and make it look like there's more activity happening. But yeah, so you're gonna, so the further towards the middle you go, so if it's coming from this side, you're gonna curve, come down, okay? And if it's coming from this side, you're gonna curve out, come down, okay, until both of those reach the middle. And so see, that's very important that you don't have lots and lots of paint on your brush so that you have those little cast shadows and highlights and things. And then I'm going to show you other ways that we can fill in and add detail to those waterfalls. So you can make this all, so I'm very, very lightly, see, look, I'm just dragging my brush very lightly and pulling down, okay? But if you want to create multiple little splash zones, so I could create another little one here, okay? Very light amount of paint. You use a little bit of pressure along the top edge, and then as you come down, very faint, okay? But so you'll notice that it's curved up here, but then all of the other brush strokes underneath are coming straight down. Okay, and don't worry about it being completely filled in, because remember, we are going to be adding some splashes and things to this later. So see here, I'm going to show you guys how to add definition by adding little splashes, and we're going to add other color and things on top of this, okay? So you can use little bits of dark blue, so you can go back in with dark blue, and then you can run that through in a few spots very lightly, okay? Very, very soft brush strokes, okay? Very soft. So I just take what very little bit of paint I have on my brush and then very softly pull that through until I don't have any more paint on my brush, okay? And if you need more coverage up at the top, just make sure that you use a little bit more pressure when you're at the top, and then just as you're coming down, less pressure. So pressure, no pressure. No pressure, guys. Easy going. It's supposed to be relaxing. Have fun with it, okay? But yeah, you can play and play with that, okay? But I'm going to show you a couple of different ways we can define our waterfalls. So if you want to make it look like there's a few little ripples and things happening in the water, you can take like little bits of white paint or light blue, and you can turn your brush sideways now, so like this direction, and then you can very lightly tap in, you know, little ripples. So I'm just very lightly tapping in a few spots, staggered, to create the look of like maybe there's some little rocks poking out, and I want to make it look so very, very gently tapping to make it look like, you know, there's some little ripples and things happening as the water is rushing down, okay? And if you don't love all of those things, you can just clean off your brush, wipe it off very thoroughly, and then you can very gently run your brush through to kind of blend some of that out, okay? But it is very good to take little bits of white or different shades. So if like I had too much of a solid area here and I wanted to break that up, this would be a good opportunity to take a contrasting color like white or light blue and then just kind of tap in a few spots. Okay? To bring that down, okay? So what I would like to see though is you want the top to be nice and bright. If this is really wet, don't add anything. But if it's not wet, take just a tiny little bit of white paint on your brush and then gently run that along just the top edge in a few spots. So like make mini curved brush strokes here. And so what that will provide is the black is the deepest shadow, and the blue is kind of like a mid-tone, and then white will serve as like a highlight. So you just take a tiny bit of white, and then you can kind of very gently brush that through in that curved motion. And they don't all need to be exactly the same length. So some can be short, some can be a little bit longer, but you do want the upper edge of that waterfall where the water is falling in to be more defined. And so if you add like a little bit of white just along the upper edge, that's really going to make that pop out against that darker color. So hopefully everybody's able to follow along with that and that makes sense to everybody. And then once this is defined, we can start to add some little splashes in here. So you can take white or you can take light blue, and I'm going to use that tapping motion. And so like if this is the bottom of this waterfall, then I would just tap, tap, tap starting here, and I can make, you know, a few of those splashes coming out and away. So I will suggest this to all of you guys. When you're making your little splashes for your waterfall, start small and be conservative with how big you make it, because you can always make it bigger, but if you make it bigger than you want, it's harder to adjust that later. So all I'm doing is I'm just very lightly tapping with a contrasting color. So if this is all blue, I'd want to use like bright white. Just a tiny bit of paint though. So I dip, wipe my brush so that there's not tons on there, and then everywhere where a waterfall ends, you can kind of tap and create little splashes, okay? So that means that this is where the waterfall meets down here at the bottom. I can tap. So we want it to be light tapping though, because we don't want it completely solid. We want to make it look like there's movement happening and bursts of water going everywhere. And instead of it just being one big blob, you want to make it look like if the water hits, it's going to bounce and then go off to the side or go up, but it's not going to just go straight up. It's going to kind of go in a curved motion, like it's moving through the air. So I start in the center, and then I can very lightly and conservatively splash this. And you can make it do more later, but let's start small, and then you can build up from that point, okay? And then if you want to, you can also add some, like, because the water is kind of flowing through here, you can add some tiny little ripples or splashes like around the base of the rocks. So see, I'm just very lightly touching with white, tiny bit of paint, tap, 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 just to create some ripples, like that water is rushing and hitting the edge of the rock and then creating, you know, some little splashes. Okay? And so the other important thing here is in order to get definition and separation between the paint, you want to make sure that in between each layer it's kind of dry, because otherwise the paint will just blend together if it's too wet. So the other thing is acrylic paint will dry like a shade darker than you put it on. So if you notice that you put the white on and it's not quite bright enough, just let it dry and then come back in and then do a second coat of white later to brighten it up or add separation. But definitely do that kind of stuff when it is dry instead of when it's wet, or else you're just going to blend everything into one solid color. Okay. All right, so we're starting to see some life happen in here, hopefully, and hopefully you guys are enjoying that time. So we've got the basis of our waterfall in there. We can definitely come back in and add more detail to our waterfall, but what I want to do right now is I kind of want to add some definition and shrubbery around the outside to fill in the rest of my picture. So I'm going to clean off my brush, and then I'm going to go back to that green and yellow mixture where we had a little bit of green and yellow on our brush, and I'm going to tap and fill in on top of my rocks. And so the beauty of this here is, like I said, guys, it didn't matter if what your rocks looked like, because we're going to cover them up, but we can also make it look like this waterfall is like behind these bushes and they're kind of popping out in front. So what I like to do is I tap the green on here and then I kind of overlap the edge so that it looks like the waterfall is kind of poking out behind and it brings it forward. I'm going to show you guys a way to add more definition to this, but see, I'm just taking that green and I'm just tap, tap, tap and covering up the whole rock, okay? You can leave a few little patches, so if you wanted to leave like a little a tiny little patch where part of the rock is poking out, you can definitely do that. But yeah, I'm going to take my green, a little bit of yellow, And I'm just gonna tap, tap, tap all over and fill this in here. Am I going too fast for you guys? Does anybody have questions for me so far? Or are we feeling happy and at peace with the world? Hopefully my connection sustains and we are able to continue. So I'm just tapping, tap, 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 just to create some texture on the surface here. I'm not really creating a pattern. If it looks like polka dots, then maybe tap a little bit and blend a little bit more. Okay, and so what we can do too is that when you get down here to like the top of the water, this doesn't have to be flat on the edge. You can kind of cover that up, like the plants are kind of growing over the edges. Well, I'm happy to slow down, and if you guys need or have any questions, just let me know what I can do, okay, to help. So like I said, when you're painting the waterfalls, it's all about using a light hand, and you can always come back in with the second layer after it's dry and make the adjustments that you need, okay? So we're just gonna do the green for now, and then we can come back in to the waterfall in a minute, okay? So take a break from that and breathe, because what usually ends up happening is if you are not quite satisfied with how it's looking, you want to keep working on it, and the problem with that is when you keep working on something, it'll just continue to blend into one color. So we want to maintain some contrast, so take a break from it, step away, and then just play with the green for a little bit, and then come back and revisit that in a moment, okay? So I'm covering up that gray, and then see how every once in a while I can leave little patches of the gray poking through, and I can do a second coat and kind of overlap here. I'm going to show you guys how we can highlight this though and make it more interesting. And so you can overlap the top of the water on the edge if you want. If you want to create even more interest, you can kind of tap and make it look like, you know, there's some greenery in the corner. But I'm just tapping, tap, tap, tap with the forward motion of the brush, like this, like that. Okay, and again, I'm going to show you guys how to highlight this also. But yeah, so we're doing this on this side, and then I'm taking green and I'm doing the same thing on this side. So I'm just tapping. And if you can see big hunks of paint, big blobs, that means that you have too much paint. Wipe off your brush. You don't need tons of paint. You just need enough to tap and cover up the rock, okay? And it's okay to overlap the edge of your waterfall in a few spots, because then it makes it look like that waterfall is kind of peeking out from behind the bushes, back in the back. And if you have a bigger brush like this works well too, because the bristles are nice and stiff and they're like kind of separated also, so you can also use a bigger brush like that if that's easier. But see, you can take some of the foliage here, you can tap in and overlap. So if you didn't like part of your water, you can make this come in a little bit on the edges. Where's it gonna go? What's gonna happen? How are we gonna make this better? Sometimes it's just about the journey, guys. Sometimes we don't always know how things are going to turn out, and that's okay. It's all about being able to evolve and go with the flow and relax and adapt. Being able to adapt is a good skill, especially in art. I think all around it's a good skill, but yeah, we can add that everywhere. So you can fill this in, you can leave a few little patches if you want. If it looks like polka dots, then it needs to be filled in a little bit more, but yeah, see how I left a few little spaces? Okay. So all I did was took green, maybe you had a little bit of yellow on your brush, and you're just tapping that, tap, 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 all the way in, okay? We are gonna add more layers in here to add highlights to these trees and bushes and shrubs, and you can add more highlights and layers to your waterfalls too. So do not fret, my painter friends. I've got your back. And if you have questions, just feel free to type those in. We'll take a pause for a moment just to make sure that we're all on the same path. Okay. So here is where we are at in this painting right now. Let's go back to the original painting for a moment and just take a look, okay? So let's identify some of the things that we have done already. Okay, so the first step was to paint the light blue sky. Okay, and so it was very important for us to have the light color so that it contrasted with the green. Next, we painted the majority of the rest of our canvas black to create a nice contrasting dark color and cast shadow for all of our light colors to stand out against. Okay, after we painted the black, we did 2 gray stones for where the waterfall was going to flow between, and we just used a light gray color to paint that there. After we painted the gray stones, we then used a mixture of a little bit of blue and white, and we learned how to do the curved brush stroke that created the look of the stones with water rushing over them in the front here. And then we used horizontal thin brush strokes, creating a nice blend for our creek or pond underneath here, okay? And then we used that same brush stroke in combination with very light brush strokes, and we pulled down and created the curve and the splash of our waterfalls running between the 2 rocks. And then using light tapping motions, we created ripples on the water. We created splashes at the top wherever the waterfalls ended. And like I said, guys, we can always make our splashes more dynamic and bigger later, but we just want to get the basis of that so you guys understand. Okay, and then once we had that defined, we then took the rest of our green. We created a green border at the top, but we also tapped green along our gray to cover that up and create where our foliage is going to be, which is here, okay? So that's where we're at right now. Okay, so what we're going to do now is you guys are going to learn how to create some highlights on the foliage here to really make this pop out. So here's the thing. Whenever you are creating a painting, you have to kind of think about, especially when you're trying to create dimension, you want to think about where the light is coming from in the painting so that you can add more definition. In this case, because the sky is light and this is down way below, this is going to be darker and this is going to be lighter. So that means anywhere that there's a highlight on the painting, it's going to be along the top edge of any of our foliage, okay? So where the opening is at, there would be lighter colors. Anywhere where there's a new tree, there would be lighter colors, okay? Along the top edge up here, there would be lighter colors. And so what we want to do is you have this green here. You can either take a lighter green, so you can take the same green that you were using and just make it slightly lighter by adding yellow to it, or you can use yellow just by itself. If the paint is still wet, it will mix. And then watch here how so this is one solid color, but watch how adding a contrast of a lighter color makes a difference in your painting. So if I take that same technique where I'm just tapping, but instead of tapping all the way through, I'm just tapping it along one corner here. See how that adds definition between this area and that? So if I make this more concentrated and a little bit brighter along the edge, I can show separation between this area and this area. Okay, so if I wanted to create another little bush or tree area, I could take more yellow, and I don't have a lot on my brush, just a little bit, but using the tapping technique, see, I can kind of create a, so I'm tapping and I'm creating kind of a curved but lumpy area just to create a highlight in the bushes or in the trees that I'm going to have there. Okay, so if I were to go on this side, because the light is casting through the middle where the waterfall is at, I would take the lighter color and I would tap that along the, oh here, let me tap out a little bit more, along the inner edge or outer edge of this green area. There, okay? And then if it's not as blended as you would like on the inner edge, like if this is too defined and it's too bright yellow, then you can go back to a little bit of the green, and then you can tap that just on the inner edge to help blend that a little bit. But then you would continue to add highlights. So I could take more yellow, and instead of just doing a straight line across, you'll notice I'm tapping and I'm making lumpy areas, but they're slightly curved to follow the shape of the tree or the rock that I created. Okay, so I can add little highlights, see, on the outer edge. So the more you tap, the more blended it will be. And if you want some of it to not be blended, then you'll just like maybe tap once or twice and let the highlight just stay there. But the lower you go on the rock area, obviously this will still stay curved, but you know, it'll be, you know, a shorter curve the further or closer you come towards this area. So you want the top edge of wherever you're trying to create definition to be nice and light and bright. See? Like this. And then if you want to merge the colors underneath, you can take, you know, your green and then tap on the inner edge. Tap, 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 tap. Just to kind of merge those and soften that up, okay? So if you want to add even more definition to the trees that are up above, if you take yellow and instead of just doing it all along the upper edge of all the trees, pick a side. So for instance, if the light is on the right side of the rocks here on this, then maybe tap a little bit of yellow just on the right side of these little areas up here. Okay, so for instance, if I were to switch to this side, because the yellow is on the left side, I could take yellow and I can tap along the left side of the trees or the bushes there to add a little bit of extra definition. And if it's not dark enough, I can add a little bit of a darker color underneath it to provide more of a contrast. So if that's not quite dark enough, you can definitely come back in. So the lesson here, guys, too, is just because you made, you know, you laid down some paint in one layer, it doesn't mean you can't come back and overlap and add second or third or fourth layers to get the definition that you want. But you can definitely play. But the more that you have contrasting colors, like instead of just leaving this green just by itself, if you're adding, you know, a lighter color and a darker color, you're going to have a lot more depth and a lot more contrast and interest in your piece. Okay, so you can just, I'm using the forward edge of my brush and just tapping because my bristles will separate in a way that will create texture that can, you know, give the illusion of like bushes or hedges or trees or things like that would have. And again, like I said before, if you had one of these rougher bristle brushes like this, you could also use that. So what I like to do with that is you can take that and I dip it so that I have enough paint on the bristles of my brush, but I wipe it off so that there's not too much. So you don't want blobs, you just want enough to get the bristles wet. And then see, I can tap and create texture because those bristles are nice and stiff, okay? And then you can play So see, we started way up high. These are nice, and this is a nice big area up here, and then our little spaces start to get shorter and smaller as you work your way down the canvas. So if I add little highlights down here like this, it looks like the light is hitting like some little grassy hedges along the edge here. Okay, so yellow serves as your highlight, and then green serves as your shadow. No problem, Tina. We have 2 videos, unfortunately, for this because our live connection got cut off, but it will be up for about a week, and you can definitely tune in and watch and catch up if you want. So feel free to play. Don't just feel like you have to create patterns. You can use lots of highlights and lots of definition. And if you feel like you added too much yellow, you can come back in with that darker color and you can start to fill that up. But again, you want to make sure that you're using enough that you're able to get the pigment and the color onto the canvas, but not so much that you're able to scoop it off. Like if you can see giant hunks and blobs of paint, that means use a little bit less. Wipe your brush so you have a little bit less paint and it's easier to control. But yeah, so kind of use your imagination and go, okay, this is where a bush would be. So that means that I want to tap and create where like the little highlight of the bush would be at. You know, if you're making these kind of zigzag but curving down, it also encourages your viewer's eye to go towards the middle of the canvas. If areas are not highlighted enough, let it dry, come back in, and you can add a little bit brighter of a highlight in spots. Okay, but adding that definition really makes an impact on your painting later because it draws your viewer's eye in and backwards, and you know, it makes it look all over the canvas instead of just focusing on one area. So you can really play and have fun by adding all of those extra little highlights in there. Okay, and then if you wanted to turn some of those shrubs into trees and things, you can definitely add some tree trunks. So I had some of that in the original, and what I did for that was I just took like a small detail brush like this, and I just used like a little bit of black. I mean, you can take black or add a little bit of white so it's kind of gray like this. And then if you wanted to create, like for instance, you wanted a little tree off here in the distance, so this is the top of a bush, I could just pull, or make this kind of darker up here, nice little wiggle line, and then maybe turn it into like a Y shape. Okay, and then just you can add a few branches off that. So I like to use what I call like the Y or the W configuration, so I don't add too many branches and go nuts with it. So you would either make your trunk, so kind of wiggly line up and then turn it into a Y, or you can turn this little branch into a Y, you know, so it looks like a chicken claw, or you can maybe do 1, 2, 3. So you have like 3 branches. So it's not super filled up and taking up a lot of space, but that, you know, you can create a tree that way. And then once that black is dry, you can come back in and overlap, you know, your green along the top of the branches, just to make it look like it's sitting in there instead of just floating, and you know, these branches aren't ending and making sense in any of the right places. Or you can add little highlights around them just to kind of blend it. But you want to do that when the paint is, the black is a little bit dry, okay? Because if you do that while it's, you know, too wet, then you end up mixing all that black paint with there. But yeah, so if you wanted to add like a short little tree over here, so you could just find, so Y. See, you can just add little tiny tree trunks in there, and then like I said, when the paint is dry, you can come back in and add little highlights to just to make it look like it's popping out or sinking in there. So I hope that's making sense to you guys and everybody's able to follow along okay. Man, I miss painting in person with people. Painting online is really cool because you guys are able to get this up close version where you guys are able to watch and see the painting, you know, directly as it's happening, whereas when I'm teaching in person, it's kind of further away. But I do miss the in-person interaction where I'm able to kind of watch, you know, and when people are struggling, I can go over to them and kind of follow and see what they need and, you know, show them up close and in person, or, you know, I can answer questions more quickly. But this is still cool. So I'm happy for that. So tap, tap, tap. So, I mean, man, you could add all day long. And I really feel like the more highlight and definition you add, the more interest there is in your painting. You definitely don't want to fill this all in green and then just add like 2 highlights, or your painting is going to look weird. So you want to make sure it's consistent. So if you add 1 highlight, you got to add, you know, a bajillion more just to make sure that it's consistent throughout, and you know, you're making your viewer's eye wander all throughout the canvas and not just in one spot. Okay, so you can play and you can add highlights and definition to your heart's content for that. And then if you start to get bored with that, or if it starts to wear on you and you need to take a break, go back and add, you know, add details to your water. Or now it's time to go back and play, you know, with your waterfall some more because everything is more dry. Thank you, Candace. I appreciate that. I'm glad, and I hope you guys are able to follow along okay. So if this is all a little bit too dark down here, you can definitely take just white and then add, you know, a few little thin white streaks. So what I'm doing is, the reason why I'm using the flat side of my brush instead of the wide part is because if you touch gently, you're able to get these nice little thin pointed lines, and it's much easier to give the illusion of, like, you know, ripples on the water. So see, you can come back in and add white in there if you want, or a little blues, but you can really play. And the key here is to, guys, you don't want it to be too filled in because you do want to still have some of that black, so it gives the illusion of shadow. But yeah, so if your splashes weren't popping and you wanted to add more to that, now is the time. And if you add more white, what I suggest is don't do it throughout the whole thing. Just add little bits of white, like on the outer edge, or right where the splash is going to be the biggest, you know, like in the middle, and then out where the water is going to hit the hardest. But yeah, you want to make sure that you have contrast so that people are able to see what's going on in your painting. And I hope that you're able to do something that you're happy with. Gentle, gentle. So the key to the waterfall, guys, is not to be heavy-handed. You want to be kind of gentle. And like I said, if you have a fan brush instead of a flat brush, that definitely does make a difference, because a fan brush is so much thinner, and then the bristles are more spread out than just a regular flat brush. But if this is all you got, then, you know, we make it work, right? But yeah, so adding little bits of white. Along those top curves. And you don't have to have them everywhere, but just in a few spots, just to add some definition. And like I said, using the sideways edge of your brush to tap, 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 and create some ripples. And again, when I do this too, I don't do them all in a neat little line. I kind of want to imagine that they're hitting different rocks in different areas. So even though they're all going straight down, I try and stagger them so that they're not all in the exact same spot. What do we think? So if you wanted to add little flowers or things down here, you could definitely paint some little daisies, or you can make some grass coming up out by the rocks here. So see, if I wanted to add some little details, I could pull and make some little grass coming out of the side here. Make it kind of swampy in a few areas maybe. If you go back and watch my tutorial on how to paint a little frog, you can add a little frog right there. If you go back and watch a tutorial about how to do clouds, you can add some clouds up in the sky. Maybe a few little birds. But there is so many different things that you can do and play with here. It's really, you're only limited by your imagination, not just what I tell you. It's all about what you guys envision and see happening in the painting. And then if you don't like the white on here, you could just use gray and create stones. So if I wanted to create a rock in the water, see, I could take some gray paint and create just a solid rock like this. Okay. And then obviously, because I want to make sure there's a little bit of a highlight, I want to make the bottom of the rock a little bit darker. So you want the top of the rock where the light's going to be at to be lighter, and then you can take black or a darker gray and kind of run it down and blend along the bottom there. And then you can still add your little splashes along the bottom edge. You can just play. You can play to your heart's content. Anybody want to buy a painting? So next week we are going to learn how to paint a fairy, magical winged fairy silhouette with bubbles. And you don't need a stencil, you don't need experience. We're just going to play and learn about portioning figures and playing with colors. Again, all of the classes are free. I'm running them on a donation basis. So if you're able to make a contribution, that is awesome. I love it and I appreciate you for that. And if you're not able to do that, that's okay. And I appreciate you too. I'm just so happy that all of you guys are participating. I hope everybody's having fun with the painting and able to just have a little escape and, make something that makes them happy, and that they're able to have a little bit of a distraction, because I know that the world is a little bit wild right now and we all need a little bit of some breathing time. So I just want to hopefully be able to provide you guys with some of that. And yeah, if you are interested in taking lots of classes or you want to see what else I have to offer, check out my Patreon page. The Patreon thing is a super cool way for artists and musicians, all different types of people. There's a lot of people with podcasts and things on Patreon. It's a way for us to survive, man. It's a way for the people that are following us to show their support in a way that you also get something really cool. So you're not just giving us money, you're subscribing to content that we provide. So if you really enjoy the classes, you're going to get classes, drawing tips. You're going to see behind the scenes of when I'm painting murals and get drawing tips. I send out free art prints to my subscribers. You get postcards every month. I have coloring pages that you can download and color and share with friends. Lots of different things. So yeah, but anyway, here's where I'm at. What do you guys think? Sorry we had to split it into 2 videos, but I'm hoping you guys were all able to follow along. So here's what I painted today. Here is what the original painting looked like. So maybe you can kind of follow and see what we did to create all these steps. So see here, I created a little tree off to the side, and see how I kind of tapped some of the highlights through it to break it up, to make it looks like you know, there's a little bit extra dimension in there. But like I said, man, like the stronger your highlights are, the more interest it brings to your painting. So don't be afraid of that. That's something that people get afraid of. They don't want to add in those little highlights and shadows, but it's really, really what makes your painting and drawing much more effective as far as creating depth and definition and interest. And so, yeah. Anyway, so I'm gonna flip this around for a second. Boo! Here I am again. So if you guys painted with me, thank you so much. I hope that you guys had a good time. Please, please, please share your pictures with me. Share them in the event or share them on my page. Let other people know what we're doing. And I just want to see your work and what you guys accomplished today, because it makes me so proud to see people creating in different areas all over the place and doing stuff that they're happy with. I appreciate all of you guys and your support. Please keep following Rembert Illustration, like, subscribe, follow, all that stuff. I'm also on Instagram, so you can check for updates on things that I'm doing there. If you guys can make a contribution through the PayPal or for Venmo, that's awesome. I appreciate that and love you for that. Thank you so much. And if you're interested in a subscription to the Patreon, I also posted a link to that, and I will also post it again into the comments, so feel free to check that out and see what I have to offer. Keep supporting artists and musicians, because right now with the shutdown, a lot of those people are not able to perform right now. I know lots of musician friends, especially, venues are closed, and so they're not able to make their living doing concerts and entertaining and bringing light to people, and they're doing these live shows for free to people. And so if you have friends that are musicians or artists, thank you for supporting me, and continue to support them too, because that's really important for all of our well-being, and we want to see that continued for when we can get back to our normal lives, hopefully someday. Okay, so love one another, be safe, be careful out there, keep yourselves healthy, wash your hands, be good to your neighbor. Keep creating, and hopefully I will see you next Wednesday at 4 o'clock, okay? So you guys have a good evening, and